Okay, I just got a notification that we are live. So hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Patricia Russ. I'm Senior Manager of Ecosystem Strategy at Startup Genome. Thank you all so much for joining me for this panel on the topic of producing scale-ups through global connectedness and market reach. Before we start introducing our panelists, I wanted to say a couple of words on the topic. First of all, at Startup Genome, we define scale-ups as companies with a valuation of 100 million US dollars and more. Scale-ups are absolutely vital for the development of an ecosystem, as they are role models and also motivation across the entire ecosystem, attracting resources such as talent or capital. One of the main success factors for the creation of a scale-up is the degree of global connectedness of an ecosystem. So that means how connected founders are to their peers in other ecosystems around the world. This then in turn drives market reach, which means the ability to scale beyond the domestic market. And our Startup Genome data showed that startups with higher global market reach see their revenue grow twice faster than others, and also are more likely to become scale-ups. So short introduction, I do look forward to discuss this fascinating topic with our panelists. First of all, I'm very, very happy to introduce Dr. Suzanne Amat, who is the ED of the Global Entrepreneurship Network Accelerates. Gen Accelerates is a global platform for entrepreneurial training. Then Constantijn Van Oranje is joining us from the Netherlands. He is an envoy for Startup Delta and Techleap, with the mission of accelerating the Dutch tech ecosystem, for example, by supporting internationalization. Last but not least, Ravi Narayan is currently working on building India's largest innovation ecosystem of industry, government, investors, startups, and innovators. He also is CEO of thorugh, which is a unique public-private partnership driving ecosystem growth in India. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today. So Constantijn, I'd like to direct my first question to you. Amsterdam has been rising in the global ecosystem ranking for a few years now. What do you think are the right mentorship programs that drive ambition and also globally leading business models?
Wow, I mean, that I don't know if it's the mentorship programs. I think it's in the first place, it's openness, being open to capital from the outside, being open to talent from the outside, creating an environment where the best people want to come and work, and to have a good balance between some of the leading tech companies. So you have Netflix and Uber and also Booking and those bigger companies in the Netherlands, and they attract a lot of talent as well, and they shed talent, and that they start their own companies. So to have a good balance, I think that's what really helps in an ecosystem. And then the mentoring, obviously, as you said, being connected to international tech hotspots is really vital. Many of those companies will have a presence in Silicon Valley or somewhere in the US or in other European markets. And it's doing that. We all know how difficult it is to internationalize, and to get support in internationalization is really vital. We typically don't work with mentors so much, but more with connectors, people that can support you to find the right people, instances, companies within other ecosystems, more than mentoring. There are many programs.
What's the difference between a mentor and a connector? Sorry.
I think a mentor, so if we ask someone to be a mentor, sometimes they get scared because it is very cumbersome. It's a laborious exercise. You really have to speak with the entrepreneur, help them through, and it's much more like an advisor, whereas a connector is someone who can basically give you the right contacts. You need to be at Salesforce. This is the person you need to know. You need to be at Microsoft. We can help you at the entry at the right level. Those people are very valuable. But it's not the same as local mentoring, which goes much deeper and requires a lot more effort as well.
Thank you. Susan, what do you think? For example, do you think your startups are ambitious enough?
So my startups, that's the spectrum. I'm really glad Constantijn kind of started with part of that what mentoring is concept. So unfortunately for all of you, my PhD dissertation was actually on mentoring for innovation. So I think the startup ecosystem has kind of bastardized the term mentoring, and it started being this thing where you're hanging out with someone for 30 minutes and then they're your mentor. No, mentoring is a very long process where you're committed to each other and you're building the people to execute. You're not necessarily just giving company advice. So when we think about what makes the great mentors, it is an incredibly important piece of building great startups, especially those scalable startups, because the level of mentorship you have where they're data-driven, where they're focused on keeping you accountable, where they're helping you with transparency and communicating. And when those mentors have a global, great, but more importantly, if they have a global mindset and they're asking you the right questions so that you're able to push your team and your product to be really something that can go global, that makes all the difference in the world. So founder attributes, you get what comes in, but the mentor, if they do their job well, they're constantly just making sure that that team is delivering and executing and acting as ethically as possible all the way through.
And establishing the global connections for the startup potentially.
When they're ready. Because sometimes we end up having quite a few companies who are only interested in the connectedness and not getting the work done first. Sometimes you only have one shot to make that pitch. And so by being humble, by understanding how to make those customer connections and asking the right questions instead of just going into sales mode, that means you can have that long-term relationship, build that connectivity. And then when you're ready, which may be 6 months, a year, 2 years later, to have that distribution deal, that partnership, the relationship is already there.
So how much of that mentoring can be done by a good investor, in your view?
A lot. But it really comes back to the investor being patient enough to understand it's the long term of building the people to execute as opposed to just trying to get that return. So it's a very special type of investor who's in it for the long run and building the entrepreneur.
Very interesting you asked that, Constantine, because no doubt that capital is one of the main drivers of internationalization. One of the questions I'd like to ask you is, how can we shape a venture capital culture where the rounds are actually big enough or substantial enough for startups to go global? Does anyone want to take this one?
Let me start. Can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yes, very well.
Yeah, so, I have a constant steady state kind of situation where mentoring, investment was all well understood. We are beginning to find a way to, define them earlier. But I think with this whole pandemic, everything is changing. And the new normal, what we had taken for granted as a way to go about doing things. Mentoring, for example, from what Susan talked about as a long-term, deep relationship kind of a thing to connecting to people is the truth is somewhere in between. Similarly for investment as well, I think you will find that there was so much going on in the early stages of investment. So there were in almost 2 years, 3 years, people would be still seed funded, but they would have raised $5.6 million on an average, which was a lot of money. And then they would come into Series A, and then Series A was actually looking more like Series B at that point in time. But also, I think you're beginning to see a new way of investments happening today. I'm seeing more and more investment happening amongst the startups in India and in the Southeast Asia from those VCs that would have not looked at this in the first place. So this global connectedness that we talk about for startups to have with customers all across the world is also now providing them an opportunity to also seek out, if they have customers in those markets, to actually look at investors in those as well. So I am beginning to find that while it is almost becoming a reality that you need to, from the very early stage, begin to see if there are possibilities of, fine-tuning your business model for the new set of customers that are overseas. So you may not be selling, as Susan was saying, selling too early, maybe too hard, or get you off to the wrong path. But you can still validate to a large extent today, given the digital platforms and the capabilities that we have, to actually really reach out and check out. And most of the startups in India, for example, are employing the SaaS model. And building on SaaS, you can actually build in India, where you have some great talent and resources, but at the same time have customers everywhere across the world. There are startups that are not even in the major metro cities of India. They're sitting in tier 2, tier 3 cities, but they sell to 160 countries across the world. And that's the kind of possibilities technology is throwing in front of our startups. And therefore, for them not only to get to those customers, but also raise money from places where there is capital available for these kinds of markets, is becoming more and more apparent. And of course, I don't know exactly how the VC rounds will look like, going forward, but we did see that things were moving to the right. Things were a little delayed, but the money that was being available to these startups to not just explore new markets, but also put in a feet on the ground, and get people to start selling in those areas. Especially for all of us, I think US is the market that most of our startups want to go to ultimately. So even if you want to have a sales guy, it will take you anywhere up to $300,000 to $350,000. Or even higher with commission, right? So that's a lot of money. So if you don't raise that kind of money through your VC rounds, you can't do these things.
Absolutely. Well, let's say other than VC capital, maybe in the Indian context, is there anything that the government or your organization is doing to help your startups build these global connections and enter foreign markets? And I'm asking this question, maybe you could phrase it in a way so that this is a policy that could be emulated by other policymakers listening to this panel right now.
Yeah, see, I think India is, very quickly emerging as one of the very active global ecosystems from day one, and because of the capabilities of cloud and SaaS models and so on and so forth. So they don't necessarily optimize for the Indian market. So they're looking at a global market. So I think it becomes a responsibility of organizations such as ours to provide that, one, customer validation, and two, access to customers on a global basis. So we at T-Hub actually serve as like a gateway to the global markets. So because we are saying that there is a possibility for you guys to get these conversations going at an earlier stage, and also vice versa. So India is a very large economy. Prior to the pandemic, it was $2.9 trillion, which is the 5th largest economy. It is also very tech savvy. We have more than 1.2 billion people's digital identity already on the cloud, and there is records of other kinds, payment gateways, everything in place. So if startups are really looking to make a dent in this large economy, obviously they would like to have a place to come through as well. And T-Hub happens to be the gateway to India for that, the reverse exploration. So I think we see as ourselves not only as people who can help make these initial conversations happen, but also help them with the initial exploration of how to go there, set up in various other countries, their presence,
soft landing support, so to say.
Soft landing support, and then ultimately to help them really get to the right decision makers, because this is something that is a challenge from a geography standpoint, time zone standpoint, cultural standpoint. So we kind of help them through all those things, so that they have the best possible way of succeeding in those new markets that they're exploring.
Thank you, Ravi. Susan, Constantine, is there anything you'd like to share along these lines?
I think it's really fascinating, the whole conversation we're having right now, because when you start thinking about the B2Cs and that last mile piece, the going global side is very different. So Ravi mentioned SaaS as an easier model for this global expansion. And what we've been talking about as being an opportunity with the pandemic is really how the companies who have been going global successfully for a long time, because of good training, because of mentors, have been doing it. They have product development focused founders who are really thinking through making something that has as much applicability as possible without the need to localize, globally distributed customer acquisition policies. They're thinking that through from day one. And it's a lot easier to do that when you have 20,000 customers all over the world who are this size of company, who might be able to do their operations this way. When you're talking about B2Cs and the amount of money they need to be able to do the marketing, do the intensive understanding of what's happening in local markets, potentially localizing with language, etc., it's a totally different conversation. So I think what T-Hub does is amazing. We've been in touch with them for many years. But when I'm thinking through kind of the normal startup that's not in one of the top 5 markets in the world, how they have to build out the system and process to be able to validate new markets, understand market nuances, and the big money comes in with legal and compliance and regulatory, and how are you going to set up your operations so that you can have the right level of staffing in place regionally or whatever geographic dispersion, versus being able to have one location and you're licensing a SaaS. So I think part of the conversation that has been really fascinating here is, how do we make sure there's a clear kind of roadmap for different types of companies? And working with Startup Genome, it's been so great to do these deep dives into specific countries, where when you see their 5, 6, 7 or top 3 industries and understand what the opportunities are. I mean, when I look at the Netherlands, it's such a great example. You have Philips doing this foundational work where you have incredible engineering talent, globally distributed manufacturing. The mindset of the Philips employees for decades, for 100 years, those are your ideal mentors, because everything is about data and it has to work and there's no margin for error. When you have people like that laying the groundwork and becoming the investors and the mentors of a country, and that's your role model, it changes the way the entrepreneurs hold themselves for what the expectation is. And so as we look to developing out many of these newer markets that their ecosystems are growing, it's not about cool, getting investors in and the hype. It's really about building entrepreneurs who are capable of building real businesses that offer value, that clearly have revenue streams, and that are going to be able to run and be sustainable and scale. And that's the challenge. It's not about how much investment, because lots of shady people get investment. It's about who's going to build real businesses that solve a customer problem, recurring revenue streams, ideally, and be sustainable with great teams and great cultures, so that as those companies grow and flourish, make new millionaires, make new whatevers, they become the investors, they become the next founders.
Yeah. So profitable and sustainable business models.
Yeah, I think what Susan points at is really important, is that it's about the entrepreneurs. So we in the beginning took a very systems level approach. So how do you expand? Basically generic soft landing in places, or coaching, all of these kind of things. Typically, I mean, you can do all that, you can lay all the groundwork, but in the end, it's the entrepreneur that decides, what is the pace of their internationalization, what's their ambition, what's their risk appetite. Obviously, you can make it easier if they get an an investor in that is very good at scaling, and that is, especially when they come from abroad, they might want to help you with introductions into these other markets. But already in choosing your investor, approaching your investor, you must have that ambition. And so it really, I think all of it starts with the entrepreneur. So if your pool of entrepreneurs are not hungry enough, then that might be your biggest challenge. So if you are in a small market or a medium market, those are probably more difficult because then there's so much complexity already in servicing your own market that you forget to internationalize fast enough. And this is, if you're a SaaS company, that's obviously everybody will help you and tell you you have to go global immediately and stuff. But if you are in robotics or you biotech or in the kind of the more capital intensive, longer time to market businesses, it's very easy to get sucked into your local market. And for instance, the Netherlands only 17 million. Europe is not an integrated market. So going to Germany, for instance, or going to Belgium is already really a choice. So how do you really early on in the company design, when you're maybe still thinking about, you're very much about your product, how do you really start thinking about all the aspects that you need to factor in about internationalization? That's finding the right mentors. It's finding the right kind of investors that can help you. Which market should you go? Those things. So we find now that we try to do both. We still do the generic stuff, but it's really supporting the entrepreneurs and even kind of drilling down on the sector because that helps. And then again, to Susan's point, if you have Philips, for instance, it's easier to take medtech and then to drill down in medtech and get the investors, look at which markets are really relevant, where the right engineers are. And so you end up, for instance, in Boston, or you end up in maybe in North Carolina. You don't end up in Silicon Valley. And that kind of intel is important to support startups. If you see that there is a concentration of a certain type of startups in your ecosystem, and you see that they are stalling because there's a market there, but the market doesn't really help them to scale internationally, then that's something you could actually focus on and see which kind of clusters can you open up for them to expand into.
Very interesting. So basically, founders' DNA, founders' culture, and ambition also is one essential success factor to go global.
Patricia, can I add to that? I'm sorry. I think one of the reasons I think Jen has been so successful in building out this international network is we really believe in allowing, and not just allowing, and promoting that the entrepreneurs can stay in their country and have global connectedness and be able to go global from wherever they are. And I think that's one of the big challenges of the last decade. We keep seeing programs where it's about founders moving to another city in order to be able to go global. And it's just so wrong. If we're able to make sure that there are resources like what Constantijn and Ravi and we are doing in our home countries, and have that connectedness, have that support, so that, of course, you're going to take trips or have lots of Zoom meetings. But as we move forward, how do we make sure that we're able to really do what many of these entrepreneurs want to do, which is be the wonderful role model and create the opportunities for economic development and change the course of opportunity for their home country? So I think one of the great things that's happening as part of the trends of what's been happening with the pandemic is realizing we don't have to be on the road 3 or 4 weeks a month. We can have these very deep relationships, build lots of value from wherever we are, and really create incredible new opportunities for entrepreneurs to stay where they are, build hope, dream, opportunity for their home countries, and still have all of the founder ambition that we've been talking about to create global opportunities.
Thank you, Susan. Building on your point, one thing we of course need to speak about is how the current health and economic crisis is influencing, the way we do business. If you had an opportunity to turn in or to tune in this morning, people said it's a global reset, basically, of the way we do business. And particularly when it comes to global connectedness or global market reach, I could imagine that this has probably detrimental consequences to the way startups perceive, you know, their expansion to global markets. Do you have some thoughts on this?
Well,
I found the opposite. Please, Constantijn, sorry.
No, they're both. I mean, you're restricted in the movement of your people, and I think there's a lot of people actually have been moving back to where their parents are because they're scared they can't move to the country. For the expat community, it's very is a difficult period, I think. But in terms of companies, no. I mean, the funny thing is the pandemic is the same everywhere, and it creates market opportunity everywhere. So, for instance, we have a company that does disinfection through a UV material, and they for medical equipment, and they are in demand by, you know, they have demand. They're just starting. Other companies completely new from Malaysia, and actually the issue is how do we get certification done here in Europe as a medical medtech company? How do you get certification fast so they actually can go into these other markets? And so they've been from day one. They have market demand globally, and it's not difficult to explain what they're doing because everybody has the same request and everybody's dying for that kind of equipment. So I guess there depends a bit on which sector you're in, but everywhere in the world we're seeing an energy transition. Everywhere in the world we're seeing more digital. Everywhere in the world we have a robust supply chain challenges. So there are logistics things. Everywhere in the world, remote, telemedicine. It's everywhere, and those solutions. So if you have a good solution, go global as fast as you can because the opportunities are now.
Yeah, Susan, you agree the crisis is an accelerator, basically?
Well, first and foremost, all of the startups that we work with understand this is the window where all the people they want to sell to are home and are available online. So they're not traveling around, rushing around. So literally the day after everything was shut down, we were already doing webinars anyway. We're doing this huge international competition, Entrepreneurship World Cup. 150,000 applicants already, and all of them from ice cream makers in the Caribbean to high tech, everything in between. We said, this is your time, guys. People are home, they're hungry, let's make it happen. So it was really about helping them reset, harassing everyone. Like LinkedIn is blowing up constantly because everyone's stalking. And we can get people on a call that may have been 3 months out or not accepting calls. And I think everybody's just a little bit more human right now too. You know, nobody minds the kid interrupting and the dog barking. And so I think it's been a really great wake-up call where the entrepreneurs don't have the potential opportunity cost of having a different job. So this is their time to make or break and make this company work or not. And then as things start to reset, maybe there will be those parents saying, go find a real job. But for now, make your company work. And it's been really awesome to see the growth, especially in some sectors, you know, ed tech, health, food, some of those areas. This has just been explosive for them. And it's wonderful to see their massive growth globally with no additional resources. So it's been really exciting.
Ravi, would you like to add anything? Sorry, Ravi, I believe you're muted.
Yeah. So if the entrepreneurs were praying to God and saying, please give us a chance to play this game one more time, we have figured out the technology, we have figured out the markets, and we just want to have a second chance to really get ahead of competition and do some wonderful things that we had envisioned when we started this company, they got it. I think as much as it has been a tragic thing on the economy and on the health of several people, I think this is a second chance for several people, several of the entrepreneurs. And just like Susan talked about, you know, it's a very different market. And I feel while digitalization is probably pervasive 100% across the board, more than 70% of the markets are actually reclustering in a way, I feel. You know, so there's no reason for us to apply the same, business model, the same technologies at this point in time to really make these things happen. I think we just have an opportunity to do something very, very different because for the very first time, we were always talking about large corporations being the bulk of the economy, and the startups are kind of the sidekicks in the whole thing. I think this is a unique opportunity for these startups to be the mainstream as well. And they will also determine, together with the larger corporations and governments to some extent, as to how the new normal is going to be. It's not like they will walk into the new normal and have to fend for themselves. It's actually an opportunity to create the new normal, because nobody knows what it's going to be, so they can actually make it happen. So I think it's a very unique time for us to do some wonderful things with our startups, and for the startups not to get stuck in their mindset that they came into the pandemic. They actually have a huge opportunity in front of them.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ravi, Susan, Constantine. These were actually amazing last words. It is a new normal, a huge opportunity for startups, for innovation. Thank you so much for being on this panel with me. To the audience, I do hope that the session could add value to your work. I wish you a great rest of the day. And if you have any further questions, I know that all of the panelists are going to be around. I'm sorry you couldn't get to questions, but feel free to send a Q&A directly or join us at the Startup Genome booth here at the conference. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Cheers.